everyone here back with Bryce Brew. I feel like I'm home. When I got the invitation from Andy and I had learned about this event, I couldn't pass it up. I know this is the first year for the Grow Like a Girl series, and I think it's all of our collective responsibility to help the event to grow. So as we move forward, thinking about how it can grow on down the line, and hopefully we continue to support Andy and the team with this. Before I get started, I just wanted to introduce a couple of folks in the room who I'm so excited were able to join me and be a part of this journey in Growing Like a Girl. My family, my girls, Ella and Jane, are here. We came in from Nevada with my husband, Jake. And then my grandmother, Evelyn Murphy, who is Winter Rice, as well as my grandfather, my mother, Martha, my Aunt Peggy, all came from right across the country to join us, which is great. And then probably most importantly, my first growing coach, Hannes Hofer, is here as well. So but where did all this begin? Back in 1987, when I was 14 years old and closing in on being 6 feet tall with shoes size 11 at that point, so I was already in a women's 11, I was awkward to say the least. I didn't have that vision of being, that I knew I wanted to be a newscaster or knew that I wanted to be an astronaut. Rather, I think at that point I was thinking about being a baker or a postman. I think at that point I also thought of being a postman. So I really didn't have a whole lot of focus at that point. I played sports recreationally. I played soccer. I played volleyball and basketball in junior high school, you can see there. And I remember very vividly when I got to 9th grade, my basketball coach pulled me aside and she said, "Tori, you're so tall. How can you be so bad?" That's all I remember. I was so clumsy. I played basketball. That's what stuck with me with the coach. I'm like, oh my God. So I was awkward to say the least. But so what happened from 1987 to 1997 and then 2000 when I made the Olympic team? And that's what I wanted to share a little bit about this afternoon. I decided to come to Rice largely because I came from a long line of Rice graduates. I knew it's the Ivy League of the South, a very strong academic program, an incredible school, and I was very excited to be part of the graduating class of '96, or so I thought when I came in 1992. And I remember freshman year, in fact, I think it was right out here. They had an activities fair kind of right around the Union. Is it still happening? The freshman activities fair? And so I was a freshman on campus, and I remember there was well, what I later found out was a barometer, but what I really remember was probably it was either a sophomore or junior boy, very nice looking, said, "You look tall. Why don't you try this?" And so I'm like, okay. So I got on the rowing machine, and it was awesome. And I don't remember who that guy was. Don't pay attention to those boys; they're not important. However, what I do remember was just that sense of camaraderie and the incredible experience of those first 2.5 years of rowing. At that point, we were driving 30, 40 minutes to Oyster Creek, and our boats were stored in the railroad cars. That sounds like they now are as well. Still welded together, these train cars where we would make a long drive, open up the rusted rail of the train car, pull out the boats, walking down to Oyster Creek. And I didn't know any different. It was incredible. I was with really good friends. We were working out. We were getting up early in the morning. We were training hard. And I'm still in touch with many of these girls today. At that time, Hannes was coaching us out on Oyster Creek. He coached us in a single. And at the time, I didn't know any different. I didn't know that there could be a launch, like a motorized launch, and that we were only as fast in our 8 as he was in the single. So he would row along next to us, kind of rowing 4s or 6s and then even 8s. And once I do remember that, I realized, well, maybe we should be a little bit faster than he is when he would, send us off for 1,000 meters or a little bit longer of a stretch at the time. But I didn't know. It was great. At that time, so 92 to 94, we we really pushed. The program, I think, was first born in about 87. Is that right, Jonas?
88.
88. And so we made an effort as a program to take the team to the next level, and we traveled to Kansas for a race, for a really big race, and to head to Chattahoochee and to some other fall and spring races so that we could live the dream. You know, let's go see who the big guys are racing. At the end of my sophomore year, and Hannes, this is how I remember it, so it probably happened very differently. I'll just tell you that right now. But around the end of my sophomore year, Hannes came up and he said, you know, you're pretty good at this. Have you ever thought about going at another program or checking out another program? And I was just kind of said, well, okay, what do you know? Because I didn't know anything. I just was really happy with the race program at that point. And he said, well, I know the coach at the University of Wisconsin. You know, I could give him a call. And I said, oh, okay, that sounds cool. And it turns out he knew the men's coach and not the women's coach, if I have that correctly. But he made a couple of phone calls, and then the next thing I knew, I had this idea that I could go to the University of Wisconsin and enroll with a varsity one program. Well, that was in my mind, and that was about the fall of my, the summer of right after my sophomore year. My race experience had been incredible to that point. We were 13, beer bug, like doing everything. I was in Hanson College. It was incredible. Academics were okay as well, but just the full college experience was very strong. So I remember going back home though to my parents in Missouri, and I said, "Hey, I have this idea. Hannes had this idea too. What about if I went to the University of Wisconsin?" This huge state school. We didn't have any connections in Madison. And because Hannes said that I might be pretty good and I could try rowing there. And my parents just kind of went, like, what? They held it together. And so now, in hindsight, it all worked out okay. But at the time, I know that they kind of looked at each other and said, you know, what in the world? And it was kind of the first time that I said, you know what, I'm not going to follow what is typically expected in our family. I want to try something different. With that said, I was very careful. I'm always very careful. And so when I decided to make the change and go to the University of Wisconsin, I took just a leave of absence from Rice because if I didn't like it and I hated it, I wanted to be able to come back to Rice and get my Rice degree and wrap up that experience. But I went on to, good times. Went on to Wisconsin in 1995, and it was not easy. When I showed up there, I met the team at their Florida training camp. So it turns out, I didn't know it, but the varsity programs actually have full-on training camps, winter training camps, because the lakes were frozen up in Wisconsin. And so I met the team in Florida, and I showed up, the new girl, 6 feet tall, a rower. And it was really hard to make friends and kind of figure out what I was going to be doing with that team and if I had made the right decision, because none of those girls wanted to give up a seat in the boat. None of those girls were happy that I was there, because that just meant more competition in order to, earn a spot in the varsity for the University of Wisconsin. But we returned to Madison, and after the winter training trip, and I just kind of kept going, let's do it, see what happens, because I committed to giving it a full semester shot just to see what would happen. And as I was looking at these pictures and kind of thinking about this journey over the past, the 10-year journey or so, what was not different actually was the people. I mean, once I got used to the team and once I made friends with the girls, that is what it was about. And while their boats were a little fancier, they actually had an erg bay instead of the 2 ergs in the old gym that we would pull out of the closet and row on to that were rusted and just in pretty bad shape. Here, they had a full erg room, they had a full indoor rowing tank. The facilities were phenomenal, but the people were the same. And so I loved the program. I stayed at Wisconsin for 2.5 years because it was about the team. It was about racing, pushing myself to the limit. And again, I love the sport and just wanted to see what I could do with it. At that point, when I first arrived at Wisconsin, even the first year or so, I didn't have my sights set on the Olympics. So I was like, this is cool. I'm in a varsity program. Like, I have a little scholarship money, and this is a really neat experience. But let's just see where it goes. And so from there were a couple of girls that I trained with at Wisconsin, and probably about, I guess, the second year that I was there, we became even more serious about the sport. We got up early for extra practices, we earned a little bit extra, we put in more miles during the weekend, ran some of the hills a little bit more. We would just kind of come together a little more frequently to push ourselves. But again, it was about the team, it was about what can we do and how far can we take this. And it was through that those extra miles that we put in that I had an invitation to join the summer program for the National Team Training Camp, kind of their feeder system.